Hi friends, I'm so excited for today's video because it's on a really fun topic, I think. So it's going to be a recommendations video for creepy nonfiction books. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So one aspect is from the aesthetics and marketing of the books, because the covers tend to have these really cool gothic or gothy designs. And then the other part of it is that they are on themes to do with medicine, science, death, and forensics. And so, you know, they do kind of lean into the macabre in that way. They kind of all deal with this fascination with death. They sort of touch on death, directly or indirectly, so definitely a bit macabre. But they're not actually scary, though you might find those topics a bit scary. But yes, so that's the criteria for these books. And so this all came about because last year I read one book that made me feel like, oh, this is a category that I love. And so I wanted to make a video talking about books like this. So that is the only book on this list. It's the first one that I'm going to talk about is the only one that I've read. The other ones I have not, but I am very interested in checking out. And so I thought I would share them with you. So right before I get into the books, the last thing I'll say is that next week I am planning on making another nonfiction recommendations video, but it's going to be for books that are not creepy. So yeah, if you'd like to be notified for that, do subscribe if you'd like to. But yes, so let's move right into the books. So the first one, the one that started it all for me, was The Butchering Art by Lindsey Fitzpatrick. And I absolutely fell in love with this book last year. So this is the story of Joseph Lister, who was a really important figure in the development of Victorian medicine, and specifically to do with connecting germs to infections and in the pioneering of antiseptics. And the story unfolds in a really engaging way. So we start out by seeing kind of how and why Lister decided to become a surgeon when he was a young man, even though it seems like a very antithetical choice for him for a profession because of his temperament. Because at this time, surgery was not really well or highly regarded within the medical establishment. It was not a fancy position to have. There's kind of this labor aspect to it. You needed like physical strength. And it's also kind of a dirty job, you know, you're dealing with a lot of blood and guts and stuff. And that's why it was sort of compared to butchering at the time. That's where the title comes from. And also the public perception was not good for surgery because the survival rate for surgery was so low. And it's not because the surgery itself was dangerous, even though people were having to have their surgeries done without any kind of sedative, but the survival rate was actually so low because of infection. And so I really love the way that the book really paints a picture of what the medical landscape looked like at the time, what those big sort of gaps in knowledge and understanding were, and all the kinds of prejudices and assumptions that were common among professionals. And then you also get to see what the public perception was. So Lister really loved microscopes, and they were getting more sophisticated, but this was a time when most professionals didn't necessarily see the potential for their use in advancing medicine, because this was also a time when kind of medicine and science were viewed as separate things. So yes, we get to see the progression of Lister's discoveries and, you know, how he went about his quest to try to find a prevention for infections. And it's so frustrating seeing how hard of a time he had trying to convince his contemporaries of the validity of his theories and his discoveries, and also in adopting his practices properly. So yeah, I found this super fascinating, a super fun book, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so from here on, I'm going to be talking about books that I have not read yet. And the next book is actually by the same author of The Butchering Art, and this one is The Facemaker by Lindsey Fitzpatrick. And this one is all about plastic surgery development developed to help World War I veterans, you know, from their injuries in World War I. So with the development of war weaponry, You know, there was also a development in the kinds of injuries that soldiers would sustain, and obviously with the development of medicine, they would also survive these injuries. And a lot of times they were left with very visible disfigurements. And so this is a story of Harold Gillies, or Gillies, I'm not sure how to say his name, but he was a pioneer in plastic surgery and specifically facial reconstruction that he developed to try to help disfigured war veterans. So we get to learn about his surgical innovations and then also individual stories about the soldiers that he helped. And you know, with a book on a topic like disfigurement, I am hopeful that the tone of the book will be, you know, respectful and afford dignity to the people that it's talking about. Yes, because I think that's important to keep in mind. But yes, it sounds super interesting, and I'm really excited to get to this one soon. Next is Dr. Mutter's Marvels, a true tale of intrigue and innovation at the dawn of modern medicine by Cristin Aptowicz. So this is like the kind of American equivalent to the butchering art, and it's about a pioneer of Victorian medicine in the US. Imagine undergoing an operation without anesthesia performed by a surgeon who refuses to sterilize his tools or even wash his hands. This was the world of medicine when Thomas Dent Mutter began his trailblazing career as a plastic surgeon in Philadelphia during the middle of the 19th century. Although he died at just 48, Mutter was an audacious medical innovator who pioneered the use of ether as anesthesia, the sterilization of surgical tools, and a compassion-based vision for helping the severely deformed, which clashed spectacularly with the sentiments of his time. Brilliant, outspoken, and brazenly handsome, Mutter was flamboyant in every aspect of his life. He wore pink silk suits to perform surgery, added an umlaut to his last name just because he could, and amassed an immense collection of medical oddities that would later form the basis of Philadelphia's Mutter Museum. So that sounds amazing. I'm really interested. And also the museum sounds like a lot of fun. I hope I get to see it someday. Next is Gory Details, Adventures from the Dark Side of Science by Erika Engelhaupt. And the author is actually a science journalist who writes a column called Gory Details for National Geographic. So this book is based on that. Science reporter Erika Engelhaupt investigates the gross, strange, and morbid absurdities of our bodies and our universe. From the research biologist who stung himself with every conceivable insect to the world's most murderous mammals, this book explores oft-ignored but alluring facets of biology, anatomy, space exploration, nature, and more. Featuring interviews with leading researchers in the field and a large dose of wit, the author reveals the most intriguing real-world applications of science in all their glory. So yeah, that sounds really interesting, and I do think that it's the kind of book that is going to be an overview. So you know, no deep dives, but that just sounds like such a fun way to find out interesting facts about a lot of different things. And I do think that it gets pretty gross. I think it talks about all kinds of nitty-gritty details, gory details, you know, like bugs and bodily fluids and cannibalism and all those kinds of things. So do be warned. Next is From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death by Doughty. I feel like it behooves me to read Doughty because she is a mortician. She runs a funeral home in LA, and she's also an advocate for better death practices. And this book is about her research into other cultures, other countries' practices for their dead. So like I mentioned, she really cares about better death practices, and so this book talks a lot about the sort of pros and cons of different death practices and important things like their environmental effects. And one of its main aims is to really demystify death, which I think is really cool and really important. She also has a really well-regarded memoir out that I would love to read. She just seems like a really cool person to learn more about. So yeah, I'm really interested in this topic of death practices. And it's also illustrated. It's got 45 illustrations in it, which is so cool. Next is Still Life with Bones, Genocide, Forensics, and What Remains by Alexa Hagerty. And this book is actually on a topic that I didn't know existed, and it's forensic exhumation for human rights. So the author is an anthropologist, and with forensic teams, she searches bones from genocide victims taken from mass graves in Latin America to try to find out what happened to them and to also try to identify who they are, because so many of them are people that just disappeared and their families don't know what happened to them. In Still Life with Bones, anthropologist Alexa Hagerty learns to see the dead body with a forensic eye. She examines bones for marks of torture and fatal wounds, hands bound by rope, machete cuts, and also for signs of identity, how life shapes us down to the bone. A weaver is recognized from the tiny bones of the toes, molded by kneeling before a loom. A girl is identified alongside her pet dog. In the tenderness of understanding these bones, forensics not only offer proof of mass atrocity, but also tells the story of each life lost. Weaving together powerful stories about investigative breakthroughs, histories of violence and resistance, and her own forensic coming of age, Hagerty crafts a moving portrait of the living and the dead. So I think that sounds pretty amazing. I really enjoy when you can learn about a new topic and the sort of history related to it, as well as having that personal aspect from the author themselves. Next is The Poisoner's Handbook, Murder and the Birth of Forensic Medicine in Jazz Age New York by Deborah Blum. So this follows two forensic scientists as they investigate particular cases of people experiencing strange and deadly symptoms and trying to figure out what is causing them. So each case is sort of like a puzzle that they're trying to solve, and sometimes there is a villain at the end of it, and sometimes what is causing exposure to a certain toxin and who is to blame for that is kind of harder to pinpoint. Norris and Gettler, those are the scientists, triumph over seemingly unbeatable odds to become the pioneers of forensic chemistry and the gatekeepers of justice during a remarkably deadly time. A beguiling concoction that is equal parts true crime, 20th century history, and science thriller. The Poisoner's Handbook is a page-turning account of a forgotten New York. So yeah, I think that sounds fantastic. Next is Quackery, A Brief History of the Worst Ways to Cure Everything by Lydia Kong and Nate Peterson. So I think this sounds really fun if, like me, you are really fascinated and kind of terrified by these kind of pseudo-medicine practices that used to be pretty common once upon a time. A humorous book that delves into some of the wacky but true ways that humans have looked to cure their ills. Leeches, mercury, strychnine, and lobotomies are a few of the topics that explore the lengths society has gone in the search for health. Seamlessly combining macabre humor with hard science and compelling storytelling, Quackery is a visually rich and information-packed exploration of history's most outlandish cures, experiments, and scams. And so it does also have illustrations to go with it, which I love. The next book is actually from the same author duo, and it is Patient Zero, A Curious History of the World's Worst Diseases by Lydia Kong and Nate Peterson. And this one's actually kind of the opposite of Quackery. It's about legitimate advancements in medicine and discoveries to cure the world's worst diseases. And Patient Zero refers to like the first patient to be diagnosed with the disease. And so through the patient, we get to kind of learn about the disease and the sort of progression in trying to find cures and vaccines for those diseases. So some of the diseases that it talks about are Ebola, COVID-19, smallpox, polio, HIV, measles, things like that. And then this one also has illustrations. And one thing that I saw from the reviews is that people say that the tone of this book is actually quite cheery, even though it's obviously on kind of a downer topic of really, really bad diseases. It's not actually a gloomy book to read. So that's good to know. Next is The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream, The Hunt for a Victorian-Era Serial Killer by Dean Job. And so this is the story of Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, who was a doctor and a serial killer. So he poisoned at least 10 people, and he moved from Canada to the US and then to Britain. And he kind of poisoned people along his way. And so the story revolves around his trial in 1892, and he was extensively written about, like Jack the Ripper at the time. Dean Job vividly recreates this largely forgotten historical account against the backdrop of the birth of modern policing and newly adopted forensic methods, though most police departments still scoffed at using science to solve crimes. But then most police departments could hardly imagine that serial killers existed. The term was unknown at the time. As the Chicago Tribune wrote then, Cream's crimes marked the emergence of a new breed of killer, one who operated without motive or remorse, who murdered simply for the sake of murder. So yeah, I think that idea of a serial killer doctor is one that's just so scary because, you know, someone in that position of doctor really kind of demands a kind of trust, you know. You kind of want to trust them with your well-being. That's kind of, and it was so much easier to get away with things like that then, before these kinds of things developed, because of, I suppose, cases like this. But yeah, so it sounds really interesting to learn about. So those are all the books that I had to share with you. I hope you found some that you were interested in, and I hope you're as excited as I am for Nonfiction November. And to be on the lookout for that non-spooky recommendations, nonfiction recommendations video coming next week. I will link to it once it's available, so you can just go straight to it if it's after that point. I feel like maybe I should have made this video earlier in the month, but honestly, the month has been going so fast. I didn't realize how far into October we were already. I don't know where the year is going. I hope I'm not the only one that feels that way. But yes, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye.